Midrash teaches that 24,000 students of the sage Rabbi Akiva once died in a matter of weeks. The story is told this way. Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students across the land from Akko to Antipatris, and they all died in one period of time between Passover and Shavuot. Why did they die? Because their eyes were narrow towards one another. Rabbi Akiva would go on to produce 7 disciples, and he said to them, "My children, the previous students died because their eyes were narrow toward one another. See to it that you do not act in accordance with their actions." And the students arose and filled the entire land of Israel with Torah and knowledge. We find ourselves in this same period on the Jewish calendar, when we acknowledge the deaths of these Talmudic students. From the second Seder on Passover until Shavuot, many Jews engage in the counting of the Omer. And while these 49 days are identified by the special blessing and counting ritual which is performed each evening, for many Jews, at least the first 32 days of this Omer period, till the holiday of Lag BaOmer, they're marked by practices of mourning. Most commonly, many Jews will not get married during this period, and some refuse to listen to live music or to shave their beards. When I first learned about this story of Rabbi Akiva, I really couldn't process it. I couldn't picture the scale of death that the story reports. And the rabbinic tradition, it talks about rabbis and their students like fathers and sons, like parents and children. What sin could be so great that Rabbi Akiva would lose 24,000 of his children? And how could these men, devoted to the study of God's laws, be the ones to suffer such a fate? And why right after Passover? Why would the Talmud teach that so many died seemingly by God's hand, almost immediately after learning and talking about God's outstretched arm, which guided the descendants of these same students to freedom? The construction of the Talmud story, it asks us to examine closely the specific sin of these students. The text teaches that the students, Shaita enehem tzara elu ve'elu. The students are punished for making their eyes narrow. So what is their sin exactly? Perhaps that it's right after sitting at the Passover Seder. After hearing about the Israelites escaping from the narrow straits of Egypt into the wide possibility of the desert, they still chose to look at the Torah and of their study partners in this narrow way. They basically closed their eyes. They were unwilling to look only at part of what was in front of them. Perhaps they were instrumentalizing the text and instrumentalizing each other in the narrow ways that they wanted to look, not in the expansive, wide-eyed ways that God needed them to learn, so that Torah would flourish across the land. Because we know that God sees expansively, and that if we want to emulate God's ways in the world, we also must see expansively. The Talmud teaches that when one encounters a group of 600,000 Jews standing together, the person should offer a special blessing. They say, "Blessed are you, God, the master of secrets, created so many people, each with a unique face and each with a unique personality." God's able to understand each unique perspective. God can see in this big group of 600,000 each piece of the mosaic individually. Certainly humans will never be able to see quite that well, but for a Torah scholar to spend all their days studying and then to narrow their eyes, to try to see even less than they're capable of, well, our original story of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Akiva's students, it explains this is the great sin. And in this way, the story reads like another Noah's Ark, a generation of Torah scholars who had become so corrupt, so narrowly focused on their own ends that this could not be the generation of scholars who would continue to transmit wisdom through the world. And if redemption was going to come through Torah, it would need to come from some other place and from some other people. Now, we know that fear and anxiety and uncertainty and grief, they're very real human emotions, and they actually force us to look narrowly at the world. It's my understanding, I hesitate to talk about medicine in a congregation of so many doctors, but it's my understanding that when the human body experiences great levels of stress, our senses are affected, and people actually experience a kind of narrowing of the eyes, a tunnel vision. They're literally no longer able to see things in their periphery that they once were able to see. And we know that this tunnel vision, it's evolutionarily good. It gives us the hyper-focus for someone to lift a car off of someone who's trapped, or for an animal to run away from a predator. And as much as each of us may understand and appreciate the essential particularist need of this superpower, basically, to narrow the eyes, we must know, too, that leadership requires eyes wide open. It demands an ability to see the full picture. It understands that we have to listen to competing demands, to listen to voices of which we agree and which we disagree. It forces us to see things, and it challenges us, and it makes us question. Last month, I spent a week in Israel with a group of Jewish educators. We traveled all around the country, bearing witness to the events of the war and the story of this current moment. We listened for 4 full days, story after story, of mothers, of fathers, of kibbutz members, of Tel Aviv dwellers, all who had experienced the very worst moments of their life on October 7th. And most still living in the trauma of those moments, and many still living in the ongoing torture of not knowing exactly when their loved ones may return from captivity or return from war. We spoke to a lifelong kibbutz member who was on a vacation in Portugal as she was receiving reports of her neighbors being murdered by Hamas terrorists as they awoke in their community. We met with leaders of another kibbutz who, after relocating their entire community to a hotel in Tel Aviv, found a way to retrofit many of the rooms into a daycare and an infant center so that they could maintain a sense of normalcy for their youngest as the war continues. We met the mother of Staff Sergeant Shachar Friedman, one of the first Israeli soldiers killed during the IDF's incursion into Gaza. He was just weeks away from getting engaged to his girlfriend. And his mom found a page in a journal that he kept. It was sort of an ethical will. And she printed it and has been translating it into as many languages as she possibly can. It's titled, "Be Good People." And she's trying to spread this message that her son had written in a journal, maybe not intending to share with the world, and nevertheless. I'm not surprised that it starts in this way. It's called "Be Good People." Smile. Strive to make every person you meet smile too. Be open to criticism and always try to improve yourself. Know that the greatest quality a person can have is the ability to make another person happy. And here's the line that really stuck with me. Open your ears to the needs of others and open your eyes to their pain. I didn't really know what I expected to see and feel when I went to Israel. But I think what I was most amazed by was the ability of Israelis to both narrow and widen their eyes. I understood the ways in which Israelis narrowed in on the task at hand. Thousands and thousands of people, a large percentage of the population, mobilizing to support others in need, collecting supplies for those displaced, raising awareness across the entire world about the plight of the hostages in Gaza. And I was amazed also by the ability of Israelis to keep their eyes open, even at this moment. A number of Israelis asked us how Jews in America were doing in this moment. Despite the pain that Israelis were going through, they found a way to show up for others. And while we were present, we also saw a growing protest movement that was reawakening around the country, Israelis standing up to their narrow-eyed leaders who couldn't understand the plight of the hostages and the desperate need to finally end the war. And while I was there, my eyes continued to open and close as well. speaking to these families, I fully understood the Mishnaic precept: to destroy one life is to destroy the world. Because each time we met with a family, I felt stuck in their world, in their experience. How would the father go on? The father who was waiting to learn the fate of his two sons who were both captured by Hamas, when one was visiting the other at his kibbutz during the Jewish holiday. How would he go on? His world was in Gaza. And what would happen to the residents of Ofakim, where residents were murdered in their streets protecting their neighborhood from terrorism? Their world had been destroyed. And of course, my eyes widened as well, standing at the site of the Nova Music Festival, a mass memorial now to hundreds who were killed. And in the silence of their memory, we could hear bombs being dropped in Gaza. And certainly, if each life before me represented a world, what do we make of thousands of Gazans, of thousands of children who have been killed and injured in these last 7 months? It made me think about all that I could not see, even if I kept my eyes as wide open as I possibly could. Far too many worlds have been destroyed over these last 7 months. And when narrow-eyed leaders call people collateral damage of a conflict, when right-wing extremists block the roads in which trucks are trying to bring humanitarian aid, and when Hamas bombs aid convoys trying to deliver that same aid, I think we're all called to keep our eyes wide open, to see all of it. We're asked, as Shachar Friedman wrote, to open our eyes to their pain, to all the pain. We can't turn away from inconvenient truths. We can't use theory to evade the reality of the people before us. And when we see killing and violence, we can't turn away. No matter how justified or righteous we may feel that the violence is. Now, keeping our eyes open is threatening, not only because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, but also because it may ask us to question what we might once thought to be true. We're taught that Rabbi Akiva came to Torah study in the first place when he was walking in nature and noticed that a rock was being eroded by a spring of water. He exclaimed, "If this water, which is soft, can wear down a rock which is hard, how much more can the words of Torah, which are as hard as iron, soften my heart, which is of flesh and blood?" Torah is meant to change us. And when we look deeply at the world, we must change. It's no accident that 7 scholars were tasked with spreading Torah across the world. 7 represents completeness, the wholeness of eyes wide open. So the Omer brings us a warning and a promise. The warning is narrow your eyes at your own peril. And the promise? You have everything you need for redemption right in front of you, but you have to take a good, long look. Shabbat shalom.